Special guest, Patrick Wood. How many of you have heard of his ministry or seen anything that he's taught? Praise God. Then you know what you're in for. You're going to be in, again, to hear from a man who loves Jesus. I've spent a very few moments with him, picking him up from the airport and taking him to and from this place. And in that short time, it's confirmed everything that I believed about the man that I'd watched a number of times on a number of different formats on the internet. He has put out some excellent teaching. So if you don't know what technocracy is or transhumanism, or if you don't know the nature of some of the components of what global cities are, you're going to learn and you're going to be in for a treat this weekend. So we're going to start right away. I'm going to ask our brother Patrick Wood to come up here. He is an author, he is a teacher, a lecturer, and he loves Jesus. And so I'm going to pray for him real quick. Okay, yeah, and I will take the microphone when I leave. Let me pray for our brother real quick, and I'll let him get going. Once again, Father, thank you and praise you for the freedom we have today to be here, for the facility that you've given us to meet in, and again, for the safety and travel that you've brought everyone together under one roof to get ministered to today. And Father, we have every confidence that Brother Patrick will share with us what it is that you've laid on his heart, and it will be in accord with him having studied to show himself approved in these areas. We are so grateful to have him with us today. So God, give him peace, strength, and the boldness to share what it is he came here to share. Thank you, and this is all for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Patrick Wood. Well, let's see if we can get oh, there we go. My golly. How we doing on sound? We got sound? Yeah, can you guys hear me in the back? I can't hear up here because the speaker's back there. How's that? Yeah? Yeah, okay, now we got it. Cool. It's great to be here. I just thank you for the opportunity to come back here and address you folks and all the people online as well. And I think before I start, I want to do a couple of housekeeping things of my own, and well, sort of, and just set the stage for the rapid fire stuff that I'm going to give you in this first session. There will be 3 sessions this weekend, as you know. My first session will be on technocracy. The second session will be on transhumanism. And the third session will be on global cities. And these are 3 related areas, as you'll see by the end of our time. But just to give you an idea of where we're going, that's where it's going to culminate tomorrow with global cities. Amazing study. And you probably haven't heard this before, unless you listen to my home church, which is called His Church in Tempe, Arizona, where I'm privileged to be able to teach at Prophecy Central, their feature, Prophecy Central, on Sunday evening. And I have several lessons up there that I don't know, over the last 2 or 3 years that have dealt with some of this stuff, including a couple of lessons on global cities. But most people haven't heard this yet, so this is really fascinating stuff. First, I want to just set the stage for this. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 speaks to us, and it says, "Now we have received," verse 12, "we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of God, which things we also speak, not in the words that which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Ghost teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he follow them, because they are spiritually discerned." I kind of want to set the stage here. Not probably so much for you folks, because I know most of you attend here on a regular basis, but especially for anybody listening. You might find this series of studies, a little bit hopeless or confusing, or like, what difference does it make? And I just want to say that the things that we're going to be discussing in some cases really are spiritually discerned. In other words, it requires the presence of the Holy Spirit in a person's life to really grasp the significance of what you're going to hear. So for you that are here, I would ask that you would certainly every day, today and tomorrow as well, ask the Holy Spirit to fill you to where you can really be sharp, spiritually speaking, where he will interpret for you or apply to you the truths that we're going to cover. And for those that are listening, if you're in that position where you don't know what I'm talking about right now, the challenge to you is basically just open your heart to the Lord Jesus Christ right now. It's not hard. It's easy. And if he's been pulling at your heartstrings for some time and you're just kind of testing the waters here, saying, well, what is this Bible prophecy stuff and what's going to happen to us? Well, now would be a great time to enter into that relationship so you can get the maximum benefit out of what we're going to talk about here in the next 3 days. So, secondly, I want to say, make it very clear, I am not anti-technology. Don't anybody get that idea that this is about bashing technology. I love technology. I have a Mac. I have an iPhone. I almost exceed the love of gadgets as much as John Heller. So, this is not about bashing technology, unless it's our technology that doesn't work from time to time. But, technology has provided some great benefits for mankind. And for those, of us who need, like medical help or something, isn't it great that we can have a hip or knee replacement and just be good as new? Or how about a heart thing? If you need stents or even a transplant. I mean, there's amazing stuff that technology has done for us that we didn't have. But my point of this is that technology can be used for good, just like money can. But technology can be used for incredible evil as well. And so that's the context that we should be looking at all of this, what I'm saying today. It's not the technology that's evil. I'm not saying that. But the use of the technology. How it's being used by men to control other men. And, basically to capture the whole world structure under a single system. This is what we're going to be talking about. So I want to make that clear. And if there's anything else along the way, if I've probably forgotten something, I probably have, we'll deal with it when we get there. Now, the name of my ministry, which is on the screen here, is Revelation Gate Ministries. Just so you know, it's revelationgate.com. And there's probably a lack of material on there still, in my estimation, for sure. I've been trying for about 6 years now to get a verse-by-verse exposition of the book of Revelation. Still not there. I'm about ready to begin, I hope. But you'll find some material there at revelationgate.com. And, I appreciate anybody that comes and kicks around and stuff. And when I get the class going, you're welcome to participate in that. Now, I should say, even though I have been a Christian for over 40 years and studied Bible prophecy for all of that time, I have a secular, not secular job, that would be the wrong way to put it. I have a secular part of my life that has also been about 40 years old at this point, and that is studying the topic of globalization. And the red book on the right, Trilaterals over Washington, is a book that I wrote back in the co-authored back in 1978 through 81 with the late Anthony C. Sutton. He was a professor formerly at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. We got together back in those days when we heard of this organization called the Trilateral Commission. We were both concerned, and we decided that we would tell the story, if we could, about what this group was up to. And he brought his superb research skills to the table. I brought the publishing skills to the table, and together we took off on a fantastic journey to document the machinations of the Trilateral Commission, which you're going to hear about this morning. And then more recently, I wrote a book called Technocracy, Rising the Trojan Horse of Global Transformation. And I should say also, I just want you to know this, that as I was researching this book, it took a period of years before I could even get to where I could express what I'd found. But I want to give credit, research credit for this book to my good friend, Dr. Martin Erdman. And if it was not for him, I'll tell you what, a lot of the stuff that I discovered, I would not be standing here today if he hadn't opened my eyes. That's another story, how that happened, but it was quite amazing. And well, I'll tell you just one part of it. Years ago, I got an email from him. He was in Switzerland at the time. Oh, he's still in Germany at the time. And he wrote me this email. He said, I'm so-and-so, and I'm coming to the United States, and I want to meet you. And I get emails, all the time. I said, oh, fine, wherever you're from. And I figured I'd never hear from him again. And a couple of weeks later, I got a second email with an itinerary in it, right? And here it is. Oh my gosh, coming into Spokane, Washington. We're living in Coeur d'Alene at the time. And I thought, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So when the time came, I went over to pick him up at the airport. And, fortunately, he spoke very good English, and as you know. And I got in the car, and I say to him, I said, Martin, what are you doing here? What? I don't understand anything. And so he explained to me. He could have done this before, but he explained to me. He says, well, when I was doing my dissertation, whatever, back in the early 1990s, I read this book called Trilaterals over Washington. And it just completely changed the course of my life and, the course of my research and stuff. It just filled in the gaps that I was missing. And he said, I always had this dream to meet Anthony Sutton. Well, okay, Sutton has a pretty prestigious background. I didn't, honestly. But Sutton did, and a lot of people know who Sutton is, even today. And so he said, I always wanted to, it's just my dream to meet Anthony Sutton someday. And then he said, I was really bummed because I found out a couple years ago that Anthony Sutton died in 2002. And I was just really discouraged because I didn't get to meet Anthony Sutton. And he said, then I was doing some stuff on the internet, and I ran across your name, and I realized that you were the co-author of that book. So I figured I'd come meet you. and I let that sink in for a minute. I said, okay, second best, huh? Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, it was interesting. He ended up staying almost 10 days with my wife and I. Oh, we had some great fun, and my library and my work was at home at that time, and we pulled out practically every book that I own, and he explained a lot of things to me that I was not aware of. And if you know Martin, you know that he's got a encyclopedia inside his brain somewhere, and that he can get a hold of stuff. So it was a pretty funny story. But anyway, he really helped me understand a lot of the stuff early on. And there's more to the story, but I won't bore you with it now. I want to start out first off that the dark horse of the New World Order is not communism, socialism, or fascism. It's technocracy. Technocracy. Some of you that have been Christians a long time remember when the first scanner was introduced into grocery stores. Christians went nuts. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to that store again. I'm going to get the mark of the beast on the back of my hand, and they'll read every time I go through. And I remember out in Phoenix at the time, we just went nuts. The Christian community went nuts, and it's like, okay, calm down. After 6 months went by, people were going back into the stores again, and they realized, well, okay, that wasn't it. The end of the world is not just around the corner because grocery stores have scanners. Well, there have been probably a dozen things like that ever since that have come and gone, where something happens in the news and the Christian community goes, oh, that's it, it's curtains, it's going to be right now, and then nothing happens and things kind of go back to normal again, right? So we've been looking. The point is, Christians have this innate thing in them, I guess, that they've been looking for the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, number one, and number two, trying to read the course, read the events and so on that are going on, and we have a habit of kind of combining these things together sometimes, not necessarily in a sound way, but it's looking back, it's kind of humorous. At the time, it was scary, but looking back was kind of humorous. And I'm no exception to that. But I want to say this, as we talk about technocracy, it is not communism, socialism, or fascism. And I know you got to get this out of your head if you're going to continue with this and really get it. It's technocracy. It's different. It's altogether different. And what I'm finding, the more I study this, what I'm finding is that this is what we have been missing all these years. That's been going on in the world, under the radar, if you will, under the covers. This is what's been happening for at least 45 years around the world, not just here, but around the world. It's called globalization in general, and there's lots of other ways to look at it too. We'll see some of them. But technocracy is a story that very few people have ever heard, and that probably includes you. So this is going to be otherworldly stuff for you. I realize that. But I can't apologize for it either, because it is what it is, right? And so I'm going to start out with the United Nations. This lady, Christiana Figueres, she, at the time, 2 years ago, was the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. How'd you like to have that on your business card? I guess you'd have a postcard, business card. She was the driver, by the way, of the now famous Paris Climate Change Conference that we all remember from the news stories a couple years ago. And she said at a press conference in Europe, what didn't get aired in America, she said, this direct quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we're setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution." Now you scratch your head on that and say, what is she saying? She's basically saying that the United Nations is pledging its combined resources and its combined power of 193 nations, typically, that sign on to all this stuff, to replacing capitalism and free enterprise in the world on a global basis, not just in America, but on a global basis. And this is radical talk, by the way. Nobody's ever said such a thing in America. They'd get shot. Well, listen, just consider this for a minute. I don't want to bring a lot of politics in it, but let's consider that we want to make America great again. Let me ask you a question. What would happen in America? Just put the political system aside. What would happen in America if we lost our economic system that we've had for 200 plus years? Think about everything that you have in your life. It's a product of that economic system, isn't it? The car that you drive out there, the job that you've had, the jobs that you still have, the money that you have in the bank, savings, stocks, all that kind of stuff, everything, the shoes on your feet, everything you have today in the world is a result of the economic system that has undergirded our country and the world by and large too, but our country especially. Everything we have is due to our economic system. What would happen if we removed it? What would happen if we changed it for some other system that was untested and untried? Do you think it would work better than what we have right now, or might it be a risk that it would work worse or even fail altogether? As you'll see as we go through this, technocracy, which you will see in the context of the United Nations, is sustainable development. Technocracy is intended to be a replacement economic system for capitalism and for enterprise. This is boring, isn't it? You know, people want to talk about, well, my candidate going to fight your candidate, man. We're gonna have bloody knockout, you know. This isn't about politics. I want you to see that. It's the whole political spectrum, the arguments and stuff that are going on in the world is nothing more than a smokescreen to confuse and to conceal what's going on an economic basis under the covers. And as I show this stuff to you, you're going to go, man, why didn't I ever see it? Well, it's just because you didn't see it. You weren't intended to see it. They didn't want you to see it. So there's a transformation going on, and I'm going to say who is doing the transformation, just to set the stage for you. You have this organization called the Trilateral Commission, number one. We're going to talk about them. You have this movement called Technocracy. We're going to talk about them. And then you have the United Nations, which is key to this whole thing. We're going to talk about that. And then lastly, you've got a raft of non-governmental organizations, which are neither commercial nor are they government organizations, but they're nonprofit, in many cases tax-exempt do-gooders, who basically can get away with anything, in some cases actually murder, who can get away with anything on the world stage, and they're very transformative, and they work in conjunction with these other organizations. Now, what programs, the context again, what programs are we talking about that are being transformed or being used for it? Some of you have heard of Agenda 21 before. Some of you have heard the term sustainable development. Perhaps you've heard the term smart grid somewhere along the way. How about climate change? Everybody's heard of climate change, and I'm not talking about the hurricane down in Texas. I'm just talking about Al Gore type climate change, right? You've heard of cap and trade. You've heard perhaps of smart growth. I'm sure you have smart growth programs here in your city. And of course, the economy, the economic system. And you also going to hear about human enhancement, which is the heartbeat of transhumanism. And all of these things are coming to bear on this transformation. Now, just to skip gears for a second, lay the base again for some of this, I want to ask the question, what is scientism? I say, oh man, here we go in a philosophical debate. Well, this is important to understand because the philosophy or the religion of scientism is at the bottom of everything we're going to talk about this weekend. You'll find it, in one way or another, you'll find it at the bottom of everything we talk about here. And so we need to understand a little bit, well, what is scientism? What does that mean? It was first defined by Henri de Saint-Simon. I slaughtered his name, Henry de Saint-Simon, okay? Lived between 1860 and 1825. He wasn't really old when he passed, but somewhere around 1810, 15, he wrote a paper in which he said, a scientist, my dear friends, is a man who foresees. It is because science provides the means to predict that it is useful, and the scientists are superior to all other men. Now, I don't know about you, but I can see several problems with that right off the bat. I don't have to, go into big, long philosophical discussion. Basically, I figure that scientists put their pants on the same way, or skirt, whatever, same way we do, respectively, of course. But back in those days, he made this proposition that science was going to become something altogether different than it had been up to that point. Saint-Simon also was is acknowledged as the father of technocracy, which we're going to dovetail in the 1900s, by 1930 for sure. He is acknowledged as the father of technocracy as well, but he was really the guy that got this idea of scientism kick-started. So what is scientism? Well, it's the application of scientific methods to social and political modeling. Social and political, it has nothing to do with science, by the way. It's the science is the absolute and only access to truth and reality about man and the universe. Now, as Christians, you know that is not true. Science is not the absolute and only access to truth about reality and about man and the universe. The Bible is. That's what we believe, right? So you see, this is quite diametrically opposed to any Christian notion, and you wouldn't be surprised that it's specifically opposed to the Bible as truth. It rejects the Bible as truth because it says, no, science is the access to truth. You can't understand anything about the nature of man or the universe except through science. And then it believes that there is no God. That's not surprising. On one hand, it has this flavor of atheism, but on the other hand, it becomes a religion of itself. And it believes it's predictive, able to foretell the future. Now, some of you will remember Al Gore made a tremendous prophetical statement about somewhere around 2006. He said the polar ice caps were going to melt by 2013, and that the seas were going to rise, and that New York might be underwater. Did that happen? Well, it didn't. But he thought he could predict what was going to happen, right? And it wasn't just a trend he was making. He really believed that he could somehow foresee what was going to happen. Well, of course, the future is not given to man to understand except through the lens of Bible prophecy. God is the only one throughout history who has ever made the claim to be able to say today what's going to happen tomorrow. We have the Old Testament as an example of that for sure. And scientism rejects any inquiry that does not agree. If you don't agree with somebody like Al Gore, you are termed a denier. And he says deniers deserve to be punished. Doesn't that sound a little bit like the Inquisition? It's about what they said. You don't agree with me? Why, off with your head. This is making a comeback. And it demands acceptance by non-scientists. This is probably the most disturbing thing because it browbeats you and bullies you into believing what they believe with no rational reason that you should believe it. So Al Gore simply says the science is settled and you should believe it because I say so. Oh, really? You just take it for, just believe what say. Not yes, he says, just believe what I believe. Well, a lot of people don't do that. They're not buying into it, obviously. Scientism has a priesthood. Saint Simon actually set this up, and his head disciple, Auguste Comte, set this up. They promoted a priesthood of scientists and engineers to administer and administrate science upon society. They called it a priesthood of engineers and scientists. We should note that it is a religion also, because where this quote appeared was in an essay that St. Simon had written called The New Christianity. I don't know how he figured it's a new Christianity by making a statement like that about science, creating scientism, but that's what he did. And it was a religion that worshiped science and the scientific method exclusive of other competing religions. It predicts the future and requires a priesthood to declare its truth to the ignorant masses. Now, this is exactly what ancient pagans did when they worshipped the volcano. I'll use this as a silly example. And the high priest would trek up the mountain and listen to the volcano at the top very carefully to see what the volcano god had to say. And then he'd come down the mountain and he'd say, well, here's what he said. Now, volcanoes don't speak, right? But the ignorant people down the mountain, they didn't know any different. The priest said the thing spoke. I believe it. So the volcano said that next month you village down here need to sacrifice 2 virgins in this volcano, throw them in the volcano and burn them up. And if the sacrifice is acceptable, not acceptable rather, you will have fire and hail and brimstone poured down on your head because the volcano is going to burp on you, right, and destroy your village. Now this is the ridiculousness of the proposition that scientism is actually a religion. But this is their approach in the end to declare a priesthood that stands between the ignorant masses and the so-called scientists, if you will. Now, I throw this in just for a little bit of humor. I got a chuckle out of this when it first came out. I'm not sure if this is Al Gore standing up there with the globe and burning up, repent, reuse, recycle, lest ye burn. And all the people are bowed down. They're saying, praise the globe, praise the globe. This is a religious proposition, and this is a silly example. But can't you just imagine that in the minds of people that have bought into this today around the world, this is exactly what they're saying? Because, people that follow the Al Gores of the world around with his global warming movies and stuff, this is exactly how they see it. All said, we have a condition of war at this point. It's capitalism versus technocracy. And I'm going to stress this time and time again as we go through. It's capitalism versus technocracy. This is the battle line that we need to pay attention to and care about. The rest of it, the rest of the stuff that's happening on top of this, the civil unrest and stuff we have in our country, the political, geopolitical things we have going on around the world, by and large, are just so much flack, if you will, for this battle that's going on underneath everything else. So what is being transformed? Here's a few things. Economics, the government, religion, law, energy, humanity itself. You say, wow, that's a fantastic list. All these things, however, are indeed being transformed. even as we're speaking right now, and I'm going to show you how. And who's doing the transformation? Well, we already got through this pretty well, all those organizations and stuff, and what programs. We got through some of these already. This is a repeat slide. I should have taken them out. But let me tell you about what technocracy is. If you go to Webster's dictionary, you'll find that technocracy with a small t means government by technicians. It means management of society by technical experts. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that definition either. Aren't you glad that some expert is in charge, for instance, of the sewer system in the city here? I would be. Because if that guy didn't know what he was doing, or if it's a woman, I don't know, if he didn't know what he was doing, we'd all be in a stinking mess all the time, right? So we're happy for technical experts. We want things to run right. We don't want things to break down. So there's nothing wrong automatically because you have experts helping out to run things in society. However, technocracy is a different animal. Technocracy with a capital T originates in the 1930s especially. It's a replacement economic system based on energy, distribution, and consumption and run by engineers, scientists, and technicians. Altogether different. Replacement economic system based on energy, distribution, and consumption and run by engineers, scientists, and technicians. So here's how technocracy defined itself in 1938. This is from a magazine called The Technocrat. Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. Can you see the economic flavor here of this? To produce and distribute goods and services, that's an economic thing. It's an economic issue. Now it talks about the science of social engineering. That's interesting. That science, that hard science, physical science, has crossed over in discipline to believe that those skills used in physical science can be applied to social engineering. That should disturb you right off the bat. Because social engineering, that's us. That's society. That's what society does. That's what people do. It's your freedom of choice. It's what, it's your preferences and stuff on what you want to do. This is what the Constitution is all about, by the way, to guarantee you the right to pursue those things which interest you. In this case, however, these scientists figure that they're going to redefine or redo everything, and then they're going to do it to the entire population. You see the word entire twice in here. The entire social mechanism, and then it says to the entire population. This is not by mistake. You remember in the Bush administration, the last Bush administration, you remember the education program called No Child Left Behind. You remember that? Well, every time you see this thinking, no child left behind, you see this throughout the United Nations documents today, nobody left out. Everybody has to play ball in the system. They call that inclusiveness. You heard that? Inclusiveness. We need to be inclusive. Everybody gets in the system. No stragglers allowed. You've seen the whole movement, perhaps you've noticed it, about the removal of cash from the global economic system these days. It's happened in India and Europe and the United States and China. They're systematically removing cash from the system. You say, why are they doing that? Well, it's, you know what? A minimum in our country of 20% of our population operates outside the banking system. I don't know if you knew that. But all the people that are homeless, for instance, and most all the people that just kind of have a paranoia about the government, they do business with just in cash. If you don't believe it, go down to one of these cash checking centers, offices, you have them, and on payday, watch the line of people going in to cash their paychecks. They go in, they pay a fee, they cash the paycheck, they take a wad of $100 bills and stick them in their pocket, and that lasts them until the next paycheck. They don't have a bank account. They don't want a bank account. They're specifically outside of it. So, it's not to say it's just the black market. There's just a lot of people that don't like the banks, don't like the banking system, want nothing to do with them. So they stay out of the system. Well, when you take cash out of the system, what happens? Everybody's forced in, right? Everybody has to play ball now. They have to get a plastic card. They have to get registered with the system. And if they still refuse to go to a bank in the end of it, what you're going to probably see is the government's just going to send you a card to say, this is it. This is your card. You'll get all access to government, whatever, benefits, whatever, through this card and through nothing else. So, a little history on technocracy. It originated at Columbia University primarily in 1932. There were plenty of meetings leading up to that, by the way, if you went back and read about it, that go back before 1932. But this was kind of the official kickoff at Columbia University. Didn't last there very long, but it was founded by M. King Hubbard and Howard Scott in 1933. The technocrats at Columbia got themselves kicked out after about 9 months because it turned out that the co-founder, Howard Scott, had lied to everybody about his technical prowess. He said he had a degree in engineering, found out he didn't have a degree in engineering. He said he was, done all this great stuff, basically didn't do all that great stuff. And when Columbia University found out that he had played them, they got really upset. And they drop kicked the whole movement out. Said, get out of here. You're a fake, you're a fraud. And so they left. But King and Hubbard got together in 1933 and they created Technocracy Incorporated. M. King Hubbard primarily wrote the Technocracy study course in 1934, 1935. This is also the same Hubbard, by the way, that created the so-called peak oil theory in 1954. And he later, even today, has been hailed as one of the fathers of the modern eco-movement. You say, well, what was the peak oil theory? Well, it predicted that we were going to run out of oil reserves and that the demand for oil was going straight up and the reserves for oil are going to go straight down and we're going to have this huge catastrophe. And kind of like the fear-mongering of an Al Gore, we're going to have this huge catastrophe and the world's going to fail. We're going to have this massive meltdown of society, everything else, if we don't get off of oil as a fuel source. So anyway, Hubbard was one of the co-founders, interestingly enough, of this technocracy movement. This is a picture. I just had to show you some pictures. This is a picture of a caravan that went from Phoenix to Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And if you can see that, did everybody see that okay? Do we need to turn the lights down at all? You can see all the gray cars, and they all look alike. You see a little gray trailer back there, and you see the bullhorns on top of the cars. Well, they would go up and down neighborhoods, and they'd say, come to the technocracy meeting. They would announce it that way. They didn't have, I guess, all the radio stuff that we have today. Well, certainly not the internet, right? There are hundreds of cars in this rally, and here they are staging in Phoenix. I got these pictures when I spoke up in northern Arizona to a group up there, and after I was just about leaving the place, and my wife Charmaine and I are getting in the car, this guy and his 90-year-old father come hobbling up. Well, the son wasn't hobbling, but the father was at 90 years old. He had a cane. He was kind of shuffling along, and I saw him coming. And he was kind of smiling at me, and I figured, okay, they want to say something. So we didn't get in the car. And the son comes up and he says, until we heard you speak, we had no idea what technocracy was. However, my father, back when he was like a teenager, which was in this day, his father had taken him along on a trip. And we have all these pictures we found in our attic. Like all of us, we're trying to go through all of our old pictures, right? Digitize them and stuff, He says, we ran across this box of slides, and we didn't know what they were, and we're scratching our head. And then we come here, and all of a sudden it's like, now we see what this is all about. Now we get it. And he said to me, would you like to have those pictures? What do you think I said? Wow, gold mine for me. And so he brought me about a slide of 35 millimeter slides. And here's another. This is not that part of that deck, but it was amazing. Here's the Hollywood Bowl in somewhere probably 1937, 38, somewhere in that area. The Hollywood Bowl was fairly new back in those days, and it's a big venue. It's a big facility. You can see it's full, can't you? Full of people. The guy's passing out literature in the back. Technocracy was wildly popular in the Depression era because there was food lines, there was joblessness, and people had lost hope. You know, the market had crashed years before that, and it was still dragging on, and there was a lot of despair in society. So technocracy offered a solution that some people thought, man, this is better than staying home and doing, you know, whatever I'm doing now. There was over 500,000 card-carrying, dues-paying members of Technocracy in the 1930s. Now, that's a big organization. That's a big social movement. And here we have a close-up of that. On the left is the fearless leader, Howard Scott, if you will, the guy that was a fraud. And you notice all the gray uniforms and stuff. Their director of operations, a man by the name of William Knight, was the guy that talked him into these uniforms, if you will. The women you can see up there, up front, are wearing gray skirts, same thing, and a top, kind of like a suit for ladies. And this director of operations worked for an aeronautical firm who had close ties to Nazi Germany and the aircraft industry in Nazi Germany. And he felt like Technocracy, Inc. needed a little bit more paramilitary look, so he suggested these uniforms. Fortunately for us, other people interpreted these uniforms as having something to do with the SS, which they look very familiar if you know anything about German history. A lot of Americans got a little nervous about this because there was a lot of subversion stuff going on, and you know, in America, oh, those technocrats, man, they look like they're the bad people. So they kind of got a bad rap in a sense, but because they weren't Nazis. But anyway, America ended up kind of rejecting the whole technocracy movement by the end of the 1930s. But it was big for a time. Highlights of technocracy. By nature, it produces volumes of inviolable regulations that are science-based. The key here is science-based. And how often do you hear that in the news? Science says such and such. Science says this, science says that, right? All the time. Every day you see headlines now. It creates totalitarian control in the end, but it is not socialism or communism. It seeks to replace a price-based economic system with an energy-based economic system. And I throw in here energy currency to put this in your mind. Energy currency was the original prescription to make things work. It was going to be the accounting system for technocracy, a resource-based system that was accounted for by energy that was used. Now think about this. Every economic activity requires energy, does it not? Even if you have nothing, it's just you and a shovel out in the field. You have one person power. If you have 2 employees, you have 3 persons power. If you're lucky to have a horse, you got 1 horsepower, right? If you have 5 horses, you have 5 horsepower. You can pull 1 big plow or 5 little plows or whatever. And if you have a factory, you need energy to go into it. No matter how you cut it, all economic activity is predicated on energy. They figured this out. These engineers and scientists did. They say if you want to control the economy, control the energy. That makes perfect sense, and it sort of. I mean, it's a scary way. So that's what they proposed to do. They were going to simply do away with currency altogether as we know it, and they were going to issue energy script, where everybody would receive a proportionate amount of energy credits, if you will, to spend during the next period of time. And during that period of time, you would buy goods and services according to the energy that went into producing them. Not by supply and demand, not by preferences or anything else, but it was by the energy that went in to produce them, and they figured they could determine all that by formula. And if you think about it, think of the shirt that you're wearing or the shoes on your feet, you could theoretically figure out how much energy it took to make those things if you traced, you know, rubber coming from somewhere and going by factory to China. Probably, I say that facetiously, but by the time it gets on a boat to China and then a boat to here and then it gets to the store by train and so on, you can kind of figure out the energy that went into producing that. But this is how they were going to control everything. As good engineers would have done, they wrote down requirements in the Technocracy study course, and I'm going to give you the first 5. They only had 7. 7 requirements of making Technocracy work. Here's the first 5. Register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. Number 2, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. Now, you all have utility bills, I presume, unless you're living off the grid somewhere out in sticks. You probably have received something in the mail in the last 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5 years that talk about creating a balanced load. A balanced load. And they want to install meters on the side of your homes and businesses and so on so that they can track all the energy coming and going inside of your homes and businesses so that they can create a balanced load for the whole utility district, right? This is an expression, this whole movement of smart grid stuff, this is an expression of early technocracy. They had to control the energy coming and going, how much you consumed, how much was distributed, so that they could create a balanced load. And if you're not familiar with what I'm looking at, just go back and read the website, go to your website of utility, you'll find the term balanced load somewhere, and it talks about it. Number 3, provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption. Number 4, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services where produced and where used. And number 5, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. You see, that could have been written today, I think. You all are probably familiar a little bit with the so-called total surveillance society thing going on right now, where the NSA and the CIA and the Homeland Security and everybody else is harvesting data. Oh, let's throw in Google, let's throw in Facebook, let's throw in Twitter and maybe Amazon. All these people are harvesting data on you. And it's all eventually going into a giant consumer database, if you will, where they know more about you than you know about yourself. And one of the reasons they know more, of course, you forget stuff, but they don't. One of the reasons that they know more about you than you do is that along the way, information gets made up about you that they infer from other pieces of data in your file. So they're making up stuff about you that you never would say about yourself, but it ends up in your file as if it were true. And this is an expression of the collection of data. These people are data vampires. They never can get enough data. Technocrats, technocracy. Enough data is not in their lexicon. There's no such thing as enough data. I'm going to switch gears now and look at the Trilateral Commission. Where did this come from in modern times? I said that it was discredited in America by the end of the 1930s. It made a huge comeback later on in 1973 with the establishment of the commission. We'll talk about it. However, in 1979, Barry Goldwater, Senator Barry Goldwater, some of you remember he ran for president as well. He wrote a book with no apologies, and in there is the only living, by the way, or at the time, politician who ever wrote about the Trilateral Commission publicly. The only one. They all knew about it, but nobody would write about it. They were scared. I don't know. They just didn't. But here's what he said in his book. The Trilateral Commission is international and is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the 4 centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. And I'll tell you what, I talked to Goldwater's chief of staff back in that day, and Goldwater, from his first-hand observation of being in Washington, D.C., he cracked this thing wide open. He understood exactly what was going on. And this was one of the major statements that he made in his book. Do you think anybody listened to him? No. Not hardly. So let's talk about the Trilateral Commission. You recognize these 2 characters. David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. They both passed away recently, by the way. It was co-founded in 1973 by these 2. They floated the idea at a 1972 Bilderberg conference. They originally picked 289 members from around the world. They picked, you didn't submit an application. It covered North America, Europe, and Japan. The membership did. About a third, roughly a third each. 97 from the United States, Democrats and Republicans. You'll see that this has nothing to do with political parties. Nothing to do with Republican versus Democrat, nothing to do with conservative versus liberal, etc. There is no political persuasion that dominates this movement. It includes bankers, industrialists, academics, politicians, media, law firms, NGOs. My book, by the way, that just got republished after 37 years of being out of print, Trilaterals over Washington, details the early days of the Trilateral Commission. And most importantly, they proposed the new international economic order. This is all over the early literature. They weren't political. They said they weren't political. They said they wanted to foster a new international economic order. Sutton and I didn't understand what the word new meant back in those days. I do now. 1974, 1 year after the Trilateral Commission was formed, they had already started to feed this doctrine to the United Nations. This was not just to be a three-region movement. They wanted the whole world. They fed this to the United Nations, and on, you can see, May 1st, 1974, the United Nations passed a resolution by the General Assembly, 3201, Declaration on the Establishment of a New International Economic Order. How about that? They said it right out. Now, this was important, even in 1974, for the Trilateral Commission to get started with the United Nations, because that love affair has lasted to this day. And they have used, I would say mercilessly used, the likes of the United Nations to spread this nonsense to the entire planet. So, in 1976, 2 years later, the executive office in our country was hijacked. Jimmy Carter, Walter Mondale, both members. They were handpicked by Brzezinski himself to run for president and vice president. Brzezinski was immediately appointed to be a national security advisor. Some of you remember Jimmy Carter, and I know, I can see some gray hair. Some of you remember what Jimmy Carter, you remember what he said? He carried a big Bible with him too. He's a Southern Baptist boy. Baptist, you say Baptist, not Baptist. Baptist. I don't know how you know, Baptist. He carried a Bible, and he said, I will never lie to you. That was his moniker. That was his slogan, right? I will never lie to you. And America elected him on a landslide. I don't think he ever told us the truth, ever. Not then and not afterwards. America bought the biggest lie, but Brzezinski had it nailed. He knew what it would take. He knew what Americans wanted to hear. And he said, this is the image that you must have to get elected. And he was their man. Carter then appointed almost 1/3 of the American Trilateral Commission members to top cabinet administration posts. At one time, his entire cabinet, save one, were all members of the Trilateral Commission at the same time. This is what freaked Tony Sutton and I out when we saw this. We said, this is nuts. This is a man who said he knew nobody out, inside the Beltway. He said, I don't know who I'm going to appoint. You can hear him talking in the southern drawl. I don't know who I'm going to appoint because, boy, I'm just a country boy from Georgia. I don't know anything. I don't know anybody. I'm going to have to rely on somebody else to help me find people to appoint. And he got there, and even by the time he showed up and set his foot inside of the White House, his first cabinet was already picked, and they announced it like a week later. Gee, isn't that strange? For somebody who doesn't know anybody, all of a sudden, these guys show up in a pack, and in my estimation, they hijacked the executive office. The original trilateral policy was to foster a new international economic order, promote interdependence, promote free trade, and the dismantling of tariffs and trade barriers. How boring is that? But this is what they set out to do. And few people had any idea, probably except for Sutton and myself, what would happen at the end of this kind of a policy being shoved down our throat. The book that set the course on this was Brzezinski's book, written in 1970, called Between Two Ages. America's role in the Technocratic era. Brzezinski had this nailed back then, by the way. He said, the nation state, as a fundamental unit of man's organized life, has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state. And you wonder, did you see that light blink?
Yeah.
Whoa. Whoa. I'm looking at you. I think the NSA just broke in on the encrypted channel to come into that light. It's like taking a picture up here or something. Brzezinski had this figured out. I remember back at the time, a lot of people got upset with what Brzezinski was saying, and they called him a communist and, you know, everything else under the book. He never was a communist, by the way. He was a technocrat. He was a political science professor at the time, oddly enough, at Columbia University. How about that? You know? Those old professors that were part of that movement, they're all dead by then probably, but undoubtedly the philosophy of technocracy lived on in the academic circles at Columbia. So he had it pegged here. The question is, how did they use the executive branch to achieve their objectives? And this is important for you to see. It was not a political coup. On one hand, you think it was, but it wasn't. Here's what they did. The U.S. Trade Representative, which is always appointed by the President, right? This is the trade representative, the most boring position in the cabinet. There were 12, up through Michael Froman, 12 USTRs since Jimmy Carter. 9 of those 12 were members of the Trilateral Commission. Now, you see, these are the people that negotiate and write the trade agreements, right? The trade treaties and the agreements that we have with all the other nations of the world. America was driving, back in 1973, America was driving the global economy. We were it. We were the giant gorilla in the room at all times. So getting control of the trade mechanism was one of the very first things they set their eyes on. This was the prize that they had back then. So you can go through here and look at all of the cockeyed things that were written that we screamed about, like NAFTA is probably as good as anything. NAFTA was architected by Carla A. Hills when she was working for George H.W. Bush. She was a member of the Trilateral Commission. She wrote NAFTA herself. Was she writing NAFTA for the benefit of America and Americans? Or was she writing NAFTA for the benefit of the Trilateral Commission members, you see, and the new international economic order? See? The answer is pretty clear. When you go through and look at all the other stuff that's happened to us and what these other people have done to us, say, yep, that was the goal. Then you have the World Bank president. Our president always appoints the World Bank president, which is one of the big engines of globalization in the world. Always has been since its founding. But you have the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Their leader gets appointed by Europe. That's the deal. We get to appoint the World Bank president. There have been 8 since Jimmy Carter. 6 of those have been members of the Trilateral Commission. Now, isn't that just a strange little coincidence? You see, they put their people into the position of running the World Bank, the engine of globalization, to coordinate the policies globally with all the other stuff they were doing with the United Nations, were doing with the U.S. trade representatives, and writing agreements and so on. Amazing. Then you had the executive office itself. You had Carter and Mondale. You had Ronald Reagan came along, but George H.W. Bush was vice president to him. He was a member. Then Bush was president. Then Bill Clinton and Al Gore made a clean sweep again. They were both members of the Trilateral Commission. W came along and picked Dick Cheney. He was a member of the Trilateral Commission. You say, well, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they were both, certainly they were empty suits like Jimmy Carter. But they weren't members of the Trilateral Commission. You'll see in a moment how they were influenced, however. Then you have the National Security Advisors. There have been 17. These are the gatekeepers to the president. You realize that. Nothing gets to the president. It comes to the NSA. That's what he's there for. There have been 17. 10 of them have been members of the Trilateral Commission. So what is the new international economic order? Well, it's the technocratic era. It's a controlled society dominated and managed by an elite. Francis Schaeffer, by the way, if any of you listen to Francis Schaeffer and How Should We Then Live series, wonderful video series, you'll find at the end of that, in series 10, he said, very pointedly, he said in the end, where this is going, he said this back in the late 70s, he said, where this is going, the world and America are going to be controlled by an elite, by a scientific elite in particular. It was amazing. He had incredible foresight. Global banks and multinational corporations are the primary actors and planners of economic life. You have continuous surveillance over every citizen. That's how you run the economy. And you have files containing all the personal information for instant retrieval and analysis. And unfortunately, it is technocracy. This is the goal on where this entire movement is taking us. Now let's look piece by piece what is being transformed. By the way, if I run out of time, somebody tell me when I'm out of time, and we'll just, really? Right now? Oh, okay. Whoa, okay. I'll carry over some of this presentation into the next one if I have to. What's being transformed? Well, economics. Let's look at it. A green economy. This is the United Nations Environmental Program makes this definition. They say a green economy implies the decoupling of resource use and environmental impacts from economic growth. These investments, both public and private, provide the mechanism for the reconfiguration of businesses, infrastructure, and institutions, and for the adoption of sustainable consumption and production processes. What did they just say? You're right. This is nonsense. This is absolutely craziness, but they believe that they can decouple resource use and environmental impacts from economic growth. Now, if any of you have a business, you know that your business depends on inputs. You have to have resources of something. If you're a cabinet maker, you've got to have lumber, whatever. You can't decouple resource use from economic activity. If you do, what have you got? I don't know what you end up with, but you just can't do it. You don't have any economic growth if you cut back resources. These people, I tell you, these people are really unplugged. One of the things that ought to bother us here too is they talk about reconfiguring businesses. Okay, you can do whatever you want with your business. Infrastructure and institutions. No, wait a minute. Institutions is our government. They're picturing our government here. Oh, wait. Whoa. You're going to reconfigure our government? Oh, how are you going to do that? Question mark. About 50 of them. Well, they didn't really specify it right here, but they did later. We'll see. Then they're going to transform government. Okay. I'm just going to show you as a prop here the original organization chart. It was actually done in color, but it was in black and white, hand-drawn originally. This is their idea of a proper organization chart for America as a technate. They're going to have a continental director. They're going to have a continental board of directors, so it'll all be scientists or engineers. They're going to have special sequences that had mucky-mucks running them, armed forces, continental research, social relations, foreign relations. Then all these area boards and all these service functions and all these industrial functions and whatever, and they're going to run everything from the top down. You notice what's missing here? What's missing? There's no representation for the people, is there? None. They felt that they would just do it top down. They'd just do everybody a favor and use their indisputable science to create what's best for you and I. And so they figured we would have no problem if they just got rid of all those people and appointed a continental director to be the head dog, to figure out everything would happen. They would not only control what gets made, but they also would control what gets consumed. So they tell you how much you're allowed to consume. If you're allowed to consume a 1,200 or 1,500 calorie a day diet, that's all you're going to get. If you're only allowed to drive 200 miles a day, that's all the gas you're going to get for your car. Incredible. This is radical. In fact, when FDR got elected, there was a technocrat that wrote a little book. I have a copy of it, an antique book now. He wrote a book and called for FDR to appoint himself, to simply declare himself to be dictator, dismiss all the government agencies, all the Senate, Congress, dismiss them all, declare himself dictator for the purpose of implementing technocracy. 1933. Wow. Can you imagine how lucky we are that FDR turned him down? We got the New Deal instead. Never in my life before I discovered this was I ever thankful that we got the New Deal. But if we had had the second option, if he declared himself dictator, we would all be marching to a different tune, namely scientific dictatorship today, where every decision for your life would be made by somebody else. Okay, religion is being transformed. You say, well, how? 3 years ago, the World Council of Churches issued a statement regarding an interfaith summit on climate change. You just can't make this stuff up. They said there has never been such a large amount of religious environmental activity in one location in the history of the world. This week will mark a watershed in the history of religion. It will be the time that people remember as a time when the world's faiths declared themselves irrevocably as green faiths. Now, I'm glad that you're not a green faith church. I don't think. But, no, I know you're not. But the main denominations of the world have gone green. The Catholic Church especially has gone green. But all the rest of them, you take all the other mainline denomination stuff, they have all bought into this green agenda, which is coming straight from the United Nations. Law is being transformed. This is important because in our country we're supposed to have the rule of law, which is applied to everybody equally. Not so in sustainable development. One of the legal scholars who invented a new type of legal theory called reflexive law wrote this: at the same time, sustainable development's broad sweep strains our intellectual, who writes this stuff? Strains our intellectual grasp of its meaning and outruns the capacity of our current legal and political system to channel society's activities toward its achievement. There is no doubt that sustainable development needs new paradigms to transform it from visionary rhetoric to a viable political goal. And then entered from stage right, reflexive law as a legal system, which has just beat us to death over the last 35 years, 30 years. One thing that's interesting here in his statement, however, is that he recognized the need to transform whatever he had from visionary rhetoric to a viable political goal. Isn't that interesting to see an admission that it really was just visionary rhetoric? That's all it was, visionary rhetoric. They even saw it that way. They had to sell a whole new paradigm to the world. And they're going to do it. To turn it into a viable political goal, they had to go through all these machinations. So they reformed law in the process. They had to reform energy. You've all seen the smart meters now. A lot of you have smart meters on the side of your home with a little Wi-Fi symbol on it. That means it's transmitting back to the utility all the time. Every device in your home has an electric signature that can be read by these meters. And whether it's a light bulb, your Wi-Fi, your hot water heater, if it's electric, any kind of motor that you have, like your dishwasher, you have a pool pump, all those types of things can be identified by your smart meter and transmitted back. Most people don't know that there's a global smart grid being constructed right now as well. This has interesting prophetical significance again, a global smart grid where the nations, the continents of the world are being sewn together with this massive smart grid where energy can be controlled and transferred and monitored on a global basis. And here's some of the people that are bought into this website called terawatts.com. It's still online. You can go check it out. Walter Cronkite, of course, is gone. Al Gore and his younger self was there. And you look at some of these names, you go, holy mackerel. Vicente Fox was the president of Mexico. He's also a member of the Trilateral Commission, by the way. And you look at this list, Senator Alan Cranston's gone. He was a huge technocrat. So the global smart grid is being constructed today as well. Humanity itself is being transformed. Some of you may have missed this Time magazine cover. I think it was 2010 or 11. I can't quite read that up there. I think it was maybe 2011. 2045, the year man becomes immortal. That was really the issue. If you never read that issue, you probably ought to go pick up a copy from the library or something and check it out. It's interesting. But a virus has no contagion. Remember, it's just visionary rhetoric. A virus has no contagion unless there are hosts who are able to carry it to other organisms who can also be infected. This was the role of the United Nations. The Trilateral Commission, plus their doctrine of technocracy, fed it to the United Nations, who in turn fed it to everybody in the whole planet. All the United Nations is focused on this stuff today. That's all they do. So what are current examples, again, of the Trilateral Technocracy Action Plan? Well, you've all heard of Agenda 21. Back when this was developed in 1992 at the first Earth Summit, it was called a plan to change the world. That's what they called it. It was a plan, the agenda for the 21st century. That's what they called it. Yeah. So in 1974, we already know the UN had the Declaration on the Establishment of the New International Economic Order. In 1987, the Brundtland Commission produced a book called Our Common Future, which became the indisputed source of dogma for Agenda 21. She was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Isn't that interesting? 1992, the Earth Summit took place, Rio de Janeiro. It was the UN Rio Conference on Environment and Development. George H.W. Bush signed it, as a ceremonial thing at least. 1993, Clinton and Gore, two trilaterals, announced the National Partnership for Reinventing Government. Nobody even knew what they're talking about back then. I didn't. But now that we understand technocracy and the plan, we say, yeah, they're going to reinvent government. Well, they have. In 1993, just a little bit later, the Agenda 21 book was published. Still available on Amazon, by the way. You can get it, like $40. 1993, Clinton signs an executive order. This is interesting. 12852. You notice there's no congressional involvement here, right? Signed an EO, President's Council on Sustainable Development. Slipped right through. Nobody paid attention to it. Then a little bit later, 3 months later, Clinton signs another one, an EO 12862, the National Performance Review, which later became Reinventing Government. Both done by executive orders by a member of the Trilateral Commission. 1997, we had the U.S. Conference of Mayors. They created the Joint Center for Sustainable Communities. Now, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which your mayor, I'm sure, belongs to, that is an NGO, non-governmental organization. They are not officially anything, but they set themselves up to be the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and so without any checking or due diligence, all the mayors of our country, or many of them, have gone and joined this organization, an NGO that has no accountability or responsibility to anybody, and they go and they get indoctrinated with sustainable development. 2001, the National Governors Association, another NGO, endorses the concept of smart growth, which has to do with all your property rights issues that you might be having. And here's an industry chart on sustainable development where it balances the environment, the community, and economy to create a nexus they call sustainable development. It's just visionary rhetoric as far as I'm concerned. You have people like Al Gore producing movies, global warming. He produced this one years ago, An Inconvenient Truth, Crisis of Global Warming. Just produced another one. It bombed, by the way. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it just bombed completely. You have cap and trade programs. They're all over the place, globally. You find them in Europe, you find them here. California's going nuts with cap and trade right now, by the way. That's just a way to control carbon and to suppress the use of energy. You had Obamacare. We still have it. Anybody think Obamacare was about your health? I don't know. It never was. It was about your data. You realize Obamacare was a massive data collecting, harvesting machine, right? They wanted to collect everything about you. That's why you go in and they would ask you questions that have nothing to do with what you went in for. Like, things like, do you have a gun at home? or whatever. Or do you belong to a political party? I mean, they wanted everything to know about you. How about Common Core? You know, some of you probably, you mama bears, have been fighting Common Core out here. Do you think Common Core is about education, truly, about your kids getting better? No, it's not. It's about the data. Common Core collects a minimum of 400 points of data on every student every year, sometimes multiple times in the year. This data will live with your student's file for the rest of their life. So what happens to little Johnny in the 6th grade is going to have a great impact potentially on what happens to him when he's 26 and trying to get a job. It's amazing. Total information awareness. The Patriot Act came along. Does anybody think it was about our security, truly? No, it hasn't been. It's about the data. Again, I mentioned this early on. Technocrats have no limits on the collection of data because that's their monitoring system in order to control society. Total information awareness. It's driven by economics. Total scientific control over the economic process depends directly upon total information awareness within that economic system. That's a maxim to take to the bank. And now you know why they need a total surveillance society. You now have the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and every week we hear some story about some other travesty of data collection from either the National Security Agency, Homeland Security, FBI, or the CIA in particular. Those are the 4 biggies. They all answer to the Director of National Intelligence now. And maybe you didn't know, but there's actually 17 intelligence agencies in America. We just think about the top 4. There's actually 17. They were all reorganized back in 2005 to be placed underneath the Director of National Intelligence, a single office, an intelligence czar, if you will, in Washington. The Director of National Intelligence, this is their official placard. This was created by George Bush on April 21, 2005. This is a shocker. The first ever director that organized the office and put everything in place, the first DNI was John Negroponte, a member of the Trilateral Commission. Do you think he organized the intelligence community to help the American people? Or was he organizing the intelligence community to undergird the new international economic order? You see? Well, we look back now, we say, yeah, that was it. Obama had his share of intelligence trilaterals. He had Admiral Dennis Blair, first DNI that he appointed. Susan Rice is a member, National Security Advisor. Tom Donilon, both NSA and Deputy NSA. General James Jones, National Security Advisor. Incredible. He was surrounded the whole time. A new and upcoming global scholar, Dr. Parag Khanna, got his MS.MA from Georgetown, got his PhD from London School of Economics. He's now a professor at U School of Public Policy in Singapore. He's listed in Esquire a couple of years ago as in the list of 75 most influential people of the 21st century. I only mention that to tell you the global elite love this guy. He's young, he's articulate, he's passionate, he has a very magnetic personality, and he wrote a book, several books. One of them is called Technocracy that we're going to talk about in global cities. Mapping the future of global civilization. He wrote a book, How to Run the World. Who? Nice one. You ought to get that one. He wrote a book called Hybrid Reality, Thriving in the Emerging Human Technology Civilization. Yikes, that's his wife, Aisha. And then he wrote a book, just published, January 10, 2017, called Technocracy in America. Now, shock of shocks. Everything that I've been telling you about technocracy probably could have gone in one ear and out the other. But Parag Khanna comes along, somebody that's listened to by the global elite all around the planet, wrote a book called Technocracy in America, and he basically laid out everything that I just told you. He says America needs to have a direct technocracy because democracy is broken. Radical stuff he suggests is, for instance, getting rid of the Senate. Send them home. Don't need them. They're broken. We need to turn the Constitution over to the Supreme Court. Let the Supreme Court take care of all the changes that need to be done. We need to get rid of the office of the president and instead have a committee of presidents, like 7 co-presidents, going to run everything in committee like they do in China, which he says is also a technocracy. Yikes. I got to show you a short video. See if I get a play here. This is his promo, his trailer for his book. That is hard to believe. But his radical program for changing America is as radical as early technocracy was in wanting to change America, was suggesting, for instance, that FDR become dictator to implement it. Almost point for point, everything in one way or another is included in Kano's new book. This is not a mistake that he produced this book at this time. This guy is a world-class scholar, according to the global elite in any case. I'm sure most of you have seen these covers somewhere, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Did you know he also wrote a book called, and George Orwell, of course, 1984. They both looked at the future with an eye to technocracy, I might add. They looked at the future about where that might go. Did you also know that Huxley wrote a follow-up book called Brave New World Revisited in 1958? He did, and he looked back to his original book, which was written, oh, by the way, in 1932, the same year that Columbia was hosting Technocracy. So he wrote Revisited in 1958. Here's what he said. The older dictators fell because they could never supply their subjects with enough bread, enough circuses, enough miracles and mysteries. Under a scientific dictatorship, education will really work, with the result that most men and women will grow up to love their servitude and will never dream of revolution. There seems to be no good reason why a thoroughly scientific dictatorship should ever be overthrown. Now, I don't take that as gospel truth, by the way. If anything, that just gives me a challenge. Oh, yes, it can be overthrown. If not by us, it'll be overthrown by the one that we know as the God of the universe in the end. But this was Huxley's view in 1958. Dr. Parag Khanna, this is the biggest takeaway I want you to have from this conference. Dr. Parag Khanna wrote in his book, Technocracy, we are building this global society without a global leader. Global order is no longer something that can be dictated or controlled from the top down. Globalization is itself the order. Now, here's where the nexus of what I'm talking about in Bible prophecy. This is not about a singular dictator like we think of Hitler, being a dictator, and he was. We think of Hitler, we think of the Antichrist or the pseudo-Christ, somehow being comparable. And even though you could say, well, Hitler was maybe a forerunner and his type or whatever, you could say that. But what he's saying here, I fully believe this, by the way. He just verbalized it. The global order is not dictated by a person. This is not that kind of dictatorship. Globalization itself is the order. You see what, do you understand? You follow what I'm saying? The global order is no longer something that can be dictated or controlled from the top down. It has become the system unto itself, run by algorithms and policies and regulations and so on that you can't touch. It's out of your control to change any of this stuff at this point because it's not politically driven. These are unelected, unaccountable technocrats who are putting this stuff in place where now the system itself has become the control point of society. And it's on autopilot, basically. It's on autopilot. Now let me just give you, I'll just give you a seed here that I want you to see. If this system that's being built today around the world is on autopilot, cruising forward, headed towards scientific dictatorship, can you think of a better person at some point to inherit or to take over that system than the coming Antichrist? See, Antichrist is the wrong term. He's the pseudo-Christ. That's what that term really is in the underlying Greek. Pseudo-Christ. People think he is Christ. They think he is, but he's not. And he comes like an ambassador. He comes like, put off like he's a lamb, not a fierce warrior. And he doesn't come off like a dictator where off with your head if you disagree with me. The system that's being built today in the world is already in place and is growing every day. Right? Prophetically speaking, this is the most significant message, I think, or the significant event that we could possibly have. And let me stress again, we're not told in the Bible anywhere that we should be looking for the return of the Antichrist. No. We are told as Christians we are to be looking for the return of Jesus Christ, right? So I'm not saying this so that I can get you to go look, you got to go look at the Antichrist. When's he going to come? When's he going to appear? Whatever. The system he's going to inherit is right under our nose. It's worth looking at. It's worth understanding because we see the building blocks of history being moved around right now, leading to that time of the end, that time of Jacob's trouble, as it's called. We see it coming. This is an exciting time to live on. When I first got saved, I thought, that's going to be great. Wouldn't it be great to go back 2,000 years and kind of be one of Jesus' disciples, We'd wear sandals and, cloak, whatever, and we'd have no place to lay our head. That was a hippie dream, right? And just follow Jesus around, listen to him teach. It'd be wonderful, man. Live when Jesus lived. I gave up that dream several years ago now. I say the most exciting time in history to live is right now as Christians. There's more opportunity for us than ever before, and there's more exciting stuff happen. We're going to see the King of Glory. Personally, I'm expecting we're going to see the King of Glory with our own eyes. Not Jesus when he was on earth as a man. We're going to see the King of Glory as we see him in the book of Revelation. Wow, that's exciting. To me, that's exciting. So anyway, that's it. I don't know if we have time. Probably ate up all my time for Q&A, but we're going to have some Q&A time later. Pardon? Okay, that's good. So that's it for now. I'll quit and be quiet and assimilate all that stuff, and we'll take another stab at it with transhumanism this afternoon.